Have you ever wanted to predict the future? Today we're going to talk about how scenario planning can help managers predict the future. You've heard of backup plans, right? Well, today you're going to learn how to create really good ones that position you for success. What if I told you that there's an actual strategy that you can use to stay ahead of the curve? You'll walk away knowing how to better predict the future and what you should do to prepare. The first thing we're going to take a look at is the fact that you cannot control the future. However, what you can do is put yourself in a prime position, even in undesired futures. So you imagine a place like Houston, Texas, where I live. We get hurricanes. We cannot control the hurricanes. We can't control if we're in the cone where it's going to hit us. What we can do is prepare ahead of time, have food as backup, have a generator, and have a mindset to leave if it gets too close. In this case, we're not controlling the hurricane itself, but we are minimizing and mitigating the amount of risks that we're putting ourselves in. Let's look at the first 4 parts of scenario planning. The first thing that you want to do is define the scope. What that means is if we're looking at a particular future or a particular thing you're interested in, we can't look at predicting or getting information on the entire future. There's too many elements, right? But maybe you're looking at the future of products within your company, or the future of your R&D department, or the future of customer experience, or maybe the future of internal hiring. These are all very specific scopes that you can focus on. And now it's not so big that you'll have too much data to look at. Number 2, you'll want to identify the drivers. So you've already looked at your scope, you know what it is you're measuring. The drivers are all of the things that impact that thing, those external factors. So for instance, if it's the future of customer experience, well, if you're noticing that customers around the world are starting to expect to have more apps, or maybe they're wanting to have chatbots, or maybe they're not wanting to have apps or chatbots, maybe they're wanting to speak to a live person. That's something that can impact the customer experience as you develop it. If you're looking at products, maybe it's something like supply chain issues, or maybe things going on in another industry, or maybe it's laws that are going into effect right now. All of these different things are drivers that affect that particular scope. You want to create a list of those drivers because these are the things you have to keep an eye out for. Now comes the hard part. You've identified the scope. You've looked at some of the drivers. Now you're collecting information from those drivers. You're collecting information from your environment. You're seeing these little trends that are popping up. Maybe if you're in one industry, you're looking at another. So maybe if you're in lawn care, you're looking at the farming industry to see what's trickling down in terms of technology. So as you're collecting all this information, these drivers, these signals, these different things that are giving you information, well, now you have to look at what are 3 things that could potentially happen that could impact my business. So I'll give you an example. You probably have a predicted future you all are expecting a certain thing. So let's say the future of customer experience. You're expecting it to go a certain way over the next 5 years. That's fine. But when it comes to coming up with these alternative scenarios, start to play with things that typically you probably don't even want to happen. So how would this look if you were predicting a world pandemic? How would that scenario play out differently? Well, we know how the pandemic impacted many companies like Amazon that actually saw greater shipments. Other companies had very little customers because they were based on face-to-face. So when you're planning those different scenarios, you want to think of things that typically you may not necessarily want or you're not expecting, but you want them to be reasonable possibilities. So in other words, I mentioned I live in Houston, Texas. So if I'm thinking about the future of my house, predicting a hurricane, that might make sense. Predicting a bear attack where I live wouldn't make sense. That wouldn't be part of a scenario where a group of bears come and attack my house because I live in Houston. We don't have those, right? So when you think about your business, or even if you're looking at your own individual future, go ahead and create 3 different scenarios. So maybe one is a world where there's mass inflation by over 10%. Maybe another one is a pandemic. Maybe another one has to do with supply chain issues to one of the main companies that you get your supplies from. Whatever that is, create the heading of that scenario. That's the next part of this process. Now you're going to analyze those scenarios. Now that you've put a heading on what each one is, so let's give the global pandemic example. Well, now you start to analyze it. What would this do to your business? What does the world look like? How does this impact your customers? Look at all the different things that you would need to consider. and planning for that type of future. So you're doing this for 3 different scenarios. And again, I suggest scenarios that maybe you're not even that keen on, because those are the ones that we're less likely to plan against. Let me give you a personal example that will kind of illustrate how this works. So last year I was hired to keynote for an event in Brussels, Belgium. My husband and I, we get to the hotel, we get ready to go to bed, but we had jet lag, so we were wide awake. Somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning, we started hearing these little trucks and cars outside. It sounded kind of like police sirens, a little different than the ones we're used to, but still identifiable. And the next thing you know, this blaring siren goes off in our room. Someone starts speaking in Dutch. Well, my friends, I don't know Dutch. Then they start speaking in French. Now, at this time, we're going to take a pause to tell you what's going through my head. Now, this is 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I automatically, for me, it's an automatic thing, started to do scenario plannings. Okay, what could this be? 1, this could be nothing. It could be something where it's just an alarm or some type of mistake or something's burning in the kitchen. I've worked in hospitality in the past. That's actually pretty normal. I've been on stage and had fire alarms go off on accident. So there's a pretty good chance it's an alarm. That was my expected future. That's what I thought was most likely. But then I said, okay, what else could it be? What else could it be? Well, this could be an actual real fire that could be harmful. So that's another scenario. Then I did another scenario where, you know what? I could be completely nuts. Maybe I'm the only one hearing this. I quickly ruled that one out because remember, they have to be plausible, because my husband heard it too. So we'd have to have had some issues at the same time together. Not likely. But my point is I started doing different scenarios. And then when I looked at the different possibilities, and I think I had 1 or 2 other ones in my head that was going very fast, when I looked at all of them, I said, which one can I prepare against that will ensure that I'm in the best possible position moving forward? And that was assuming that it was a real fire. And so my husband and I, we put on pants and our jackets, we grabbed our backpacks, not our luggage. Our backpacks have, our IDs and things in it, but they stay packed, and ran out the door. Fascinating, when we got out there, we saw people in the hallways all looking kind of confused, and I just started yelling at them, go to the stairs, fire. They started going back into their rooms looking a little confused. I guess I kind of woke them up. My husband and I then proceed, we're on the 25th floor, to go down 50 flights of stairs. And as we're running, we're the only ones in this whole fire staircase area. But what was interesting is somewhere around the 10th floor, I start to smell smoke. So that smell was getting stronger as we got down. So just to be clear, I did say 50 flights. There's 2 flights for every floor. So we're at the top of this hotel in Belgium. So 25th floor, that was a lot of stairs, y'all. Once we finally made it out of the building, our building was on fire. Now, there's more to the story. There was someone who didn't make it out of the fire. There were people, it took people probably a good 30, 40 minutes to actually evacuate that building. My husband and I were 2 of the first. But I'm giving you an example of scenario planning where you prepare against the worst possible scenario. Now, if my husband and I had run out there and there was no fire, or it was just an alarm, or something was triggered on accident, we still would have been fine, but we prepared against the worst case. That's why when I said when you're designing these alternate realities of these different scenarios, plan for things that maybe you don't want, because that's going to protect you so that even in that best case scenario, if you get something better or that desired future, it's only going to strengthen where you're at in terms of positioning, even in that spot. Let's pause for just a second. In the comments, I'm curious, when you heard that alarm going off at 3 a.m. in Belgium in Dutch, with this Dutch person speaking over it and then going into French, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have stayed in the bed? Would you have run out? Would you have done something different? So I'm just curious to know in the comments, what would you have done in that situation? So now we're going to look at the last 3 parts of scenario planning. Now that you have your 3 different scenarios, I want you to assess their impact and risks. So what particular risks do they pose to you? If that scenario were to play out, how would your business fare in that exact example? Now that you're looking at those risks, what strategic responses or what strategic things can you do right now in each one of those scenarios? Ideally, come up with 3 solutions that if you were to put them into effect right now would basically future-proof you from that scenario. Monitor drivers and adapt as necessary. So you already have plans for these alternative scenarios. You might start to put some of these things in place, or you might have them on the ready so that as soon as those little drivers or those things in your environment that tell you, ooh, it's actually going in this direction, as soon as they pop up, You already have a plan of action. You're not waiting for someone to tell you what to do. Speaking of scenario planning, I have a gift for you that will help you be even better at scenario planning, and that is my Future Ready Playbook. With this playbook, you're going to get some activities and some juicy worksheets that are going to help you think more strategically about the future of your business, yourself. You can even apply this to your family, your personal life. You can get your copy right now, today, by going under the description and clicking on the link.